I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Sir, this dealership has a strict policy against loitering. The voice, sharp and condescending, echoed across the polished marble floors of the luxury showroom. David Thompson, whose fingers had just brushed across the sleek exterior of a brand-new Lincoln Navigator, paused and turned calmly toward the speaker. The man addressing him wore a meticulously tailored suit and a name tag that read, Scott Mallory, Senior Sales Executive. His expression was one of thinly veiled impatience, his eyes scanning David from head to toe. Clearly making a judgment he felt no need to conceal. David stood still, his posture relaxed but confident. He wore a simple gray hoodie layered over a well-worn Carhartt jacket, dark jeans, and sturdy work boots. There was nothing about his appearance that hinted at wealth or privilege. Nothing to suggest he was the kind of client Scott was accustomed to courting. Yet, the quiet dignity in David's eyes spoke volumes. "I'm not loitering," David replied evenly, his voice calm and respectful. "I'm here to purchase a vehicle." Scott let out a short, dismissive laugh that did little to hide his contempt. "Sir, these vehicles start at $85,000, and some models exceed $150,000. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a pre-owned dealership. There's one about 2 miles down the road that might have something more suitable for your budget." Around them, a few customers dressed in designer brands and expensive watches glanced over, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to open amusement. The hum of quiet conversation resumed, but now it carried an undercurrent of judgment. David inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging Scott's suggestion without accepting its premise. "I appreciate your concern, but I know exactly what I'm looking for." Scott's eyes narrowed. "Do you even have an appointment? We don't entertain walk-ins for test drives on premium models, especially not during peak hours." Without hesitation, David retrieved his driver's license from his wallet and held it out. "I have a valid license, and I'm prepared to make a purchase today. No financing required." Scott didn't take the license. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest and shifted his weight in a manner meant to assert dominance. "That won't be necessary. As I said, we have a certain clientele here, and frankly, your presence is making some of them uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you again to leave." From across the showroom, a younger salesman, Kyle, watched the exchange with increasing unease, though his arms were crossed like his colleagues. His eyes betrayed his discomfort. He seemed torn between speaking up and maintaining his position within the dealership's hierarchy. David noticed Kyle's hesitation, but remained focused on Scott. "I have done nothing wrong. I am a paying customer, and I intend to conduct legitimate business." Scott's jaw tightened. "Then I'll fetch the manager." He turned sharply and strode toward a glass-walled office near the rear of the showroom. Moments later, a woman emerged, dressed in a conservative navy blue suit. Her name badge identified her as Laura Whitman, general manager. She approached with quick, measured steps, her heels tapping crisply against the gleaming floor. "My staff informs me that you're refusing to leave," she said, her tone clipped and authoritative. "I'll have to ask you to exit the premises immediately, or I'll be forced to call security." David met her gaze steadily. "I'm not refusing to leave. I came here with the intention of purchasing a fully loaded Lincoln Navigator, and I plan to pay in full, with no financing." Laura's lips pressed into a thin line before she responded. "That's not how things work here. We serve serious buyers, individuals who can afford these vehicles and respect the purchasing process." "And you've decided, without any knowledge of my financial situation, that I don't qualify?" David asked, his voice steady but firm. "I've decided that your presence is disruptive to our business and our clientele," Laura replied coldly. Now, either you leave voluntarily, or security will remove you." At her gesture, a young security guard approached, his radio crackling softly at his side. He appeared hesitant, likely sensing that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Nearby, a middle-aged man wearing khakis and a golf shirt leaned over to his wife and whispered loudly enough for David to hear. "They should have thrown him out sooner." David took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening as he absorbed the sting of the comment. Yet, his expression remained calm, his resolve unwavering. He glanced at the security guard before turning back to Laura. "I won't cause a scene, but you're making a serious mistake." Laura arched an eyebrow, a smirk forming at the corner of her mouth. "Is that a threat?" "No," David answered quietly. "It's a promise." The security guard took a step closer. "Sir, I'll need to escort you out now." David nodded slowly. "There's no need. I'll leave on my own." He turned, walking deliberately toward the exit. As he passed by the rows of polished vehicles and the disapproving stares of staff and customers alike, he caught Kyle's conflicted gaze once more. The young salesman looked as though he wanted to intervene, but lacked the courage. Outside, the cool afternoon air greeted him as he approached his truck, a modest black Ford F-150. As he opened the door, he took out his phone and dialed, "Derek," he said when the line connected. "Go ahead and finalize the purchase." He paused, glancing back at the dealership's glass facade, where Scott and Laura stood, arms crossed, watching him with smug satisfaction. "And have the team meet me there in 20 minutes. David Thompson had long understood the power of appearances, and he had also learned, over many difficult years, that the people most eager to judge a man by his clothing were often the ones who understood the least about real success. As he stood outside the dealership, watching the staff and customers who had so quickly dismissed him, he couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had brought him to this moment. His Carhartt jacket and worn boots were not symbols of poverty or failure. They were a quiet nod to his roots, a deliberate choice to honor where he had come from, and a reminder of how far he had traveled. Born in a small town just outside Birmingham, Alabama, David was raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at the local textile mill to provide for him and his two younger sisters. His family never had much money, and many winters were spent patching up hand-me-down coats and stretching every dollar just to cover the heating bill. At age 13, David took his first job sweeping floors at a hardware store for $3 an hour. Not because he wanted extra spending money, but because the family needed every penny they could earn to put food on the table and keep the lights on. From an early age, David understood responsibility in a way many children never had to. While his classmates played sports or spent weekends at the movies, he was either working or helping care for his siblings. By 16, he had learned how to fix almost anything with his hands. From broken appliances to cars that barely ran, he didn't have the luxury of hiring someone else to solve problems. He became the solution. When he graduated high school, college was not an option. Not because of his grades, which had been excellent despite his long hours at work, but because there simply wasn't enough money. Instead, he found work in construction, starting as a laborer hauling bricks and lumber under the hot Alabama sun. His first boss, a gruff but fair man named Walter Jennings, recognized David's determination and began teaching him the fundamentals of project management, budgeting, and leadership. Walter's belief in David planted a seed that would one day grow into something neither of them could have imagined. David's path was never easy, but he never expected it to be. For the next decade, he worked tirelessly, moving from job to job, learning every aspect of the building trades. He saved every extra dollar he could, not for vacations or luxuries, but for a dream he kept close to his heart. At 29, with just over $12,000 in savings, He started his own small construction firm. It was nothing glamorous, a rented office the size of a single-car garage, a borrowed pickup truck, and a handful of workers who believed in his vision. The first few years tested every ounce of his resolve. Contracts were scarce. Banks refused to extend him credit. And more than once he faced the very real possibility of shutting down. He recalled vividly one bank officer, a man in a crisp suit, who had looked at his paperwork and then at David himself before sliding the folder back across the desk without a word. The message had been clear. Someone who looked like David, someone who dressed like David, wasn't the kind of person they expected to succeed, but David had a quiet resilience that could not be measured by credit scores or dress codes. He won contracts that others deemed impossible by delivering quality work on time and under budget. He treated his employees fairly, paid them promptly, and never asked them to do a job he wasn't willing to do himself. Word spread quickly in the industry, and soon his small firm began landing larger and more lucrative projects. By 35, he was leading multi-million-dollar developments, and by 40, he had expanded into commercial real estate and property management. Success, however, did not change him in the ways it often changed others. Though he now oversaw a corporation that employed over 300 people and generated revenues in the hundreds of millions, David never lost touch with the man he had been, the young boy sweeping floors, the teenager fixing engines, the builder leading crews under the blazing sun, even as he earned the wealth that allowed him to purchase luxury cars, private property, and eventually even stakes in high-end automotive groups. He continued to dress the way he always had when he wasn't attending formal business meetings. He felt no need to advertise his success through clothing or accessories. The people who mattered already knew his worth, and the opinions of strangers had long since lost their power over him. That morning, when he had driven his Ford F-150 to the dealership, it had not been an accident. Though he owned a collection of luxury vehicles, including a Tesla Model X, a Range Rover Autobiography, and a 1965 Shelby Cobra he had restored by hand, he had chosen the truck that had served him reliably for years. It was a working man's vehicle, a reminder of where he had come from and the journey he continued every day. His purpose at the dealership had also been deliberate. For the past 6 months, David had been quietly negotiating the purchase of several underperforming automotive franchises through a holding company he owned. The very dealership that had just dismissed him so casually was among them. He had kept his identity and his intentions private, preferring to evaluate the culture and the people without the distortions that came when employees knew who was watching. The scene that had unfolded inside the showroom had not surprised him. It saddened him, certainly, and angered him to a degree. But it had not surprised him. He had encountered such prejudice before, not just as a young man struggling to secure financing or fair treatment, but even as a successful businessman whose achievements and integrity should have long since dispelled such assumptions. As he stood by his truck and waited for his legal team and financial advisors to arrive, he reflected not only on the insult he had just endured, but also on the opportunity it presented. This was not just about a personal slight, it was about a deeper, systemic failure, a failure he now had both the means and the authority to correct. And this time, he would not simply walk away. 20 minutes later, David returned to the dealership's front entrance, looking exactly as he had before: gray hoodie, work-worn Carhartt jacket, dark jeans, and the same boots that had carried him through construction sites and boardrooms alike. He walked through the glass doors without hesitation, his steady gaze sweeping the familiar showroom, where only moments earlier he had been treated as if he were invisible or worse, as if he were a nuisance, undeserving of attention or respect. Scott Mallory noticed him first. The senior sales associate paused mid-conversation with a well-dressed couple who had been admiring a sleek black Lincoln Continental, and for a moment, confusion flickered across his face. quickly replaced by irritation. Clearly, he had assumed that David, properly humiliated, would have taken the not-so-subtle hint and never returned. Instead, here he was again, the same man who didn't look like he belonged among the polished chrome and the carefully cultivated luxury. "Sir, I thought we made ourselves clear," Scott called out, his voice carrying across the expansive room where the gleaming vehicles sat like trophies. "We don't want any trouble. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, again." David didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped aside as two black SUVs pulled up outside, their tinted windows concealing the passengers inside. As the vehicles came to a stop, the doors opened almost simultaneously, and a small group of professionally dressed individuals emerged: David's legal counsel, his financial advisor, and the representative from the holding company that had finalized the paperwork less than 15 minutes earlier. The arrival of these unexpected visitors sent a ripple of curiosity through the staff and customers scattered throughout the dealership. Scott frowned, trying to process what was happening, while Laura Whitman, the general manager, appeared in the office doorway, alerted by the shift in the room's atmosphere. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she recognized David and the group assembling behind him. "I told you to leave," Laura said firmly as she approached, her heels striking the tile floor with crisp precision. "You're trespassing now, and I will not hesitate to call the authorities if you continue to disrupt our business." David met her stare without flinching. "I'm not here to disrupt anything. In fact, I'm here to continue business, just not in the way you expect." Before Laura could respond, Derek Matthews, David's lead attorney, stepped forward and handed her a thick folder. Her brow furrowed as she accepted the paperwork, flipping through the neatly organized documents. As her eyes scanned the pages, her confident posture began to wilt, the color draining from her face. "This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice suddenly lacking the authority it had held only moments before. "There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all," Derek replied calmly. "As of 30 minutes ago, this dealership officially changed ownership. Mr. Thompson's holding company now holds the controlling interest in this property and the business conducted here." The room fell silent. Even the customers who had previously ignored the unfolding situation now stood frozen, watching the scene with rapt attention. The sales staff exchanged uncertain glances, and Kyle, the young associate who had shown a flicker of doubt during the earlier confrontation, looked positively stunned. Scott's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the dark blue of his suit. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "He can't just walk in here and claim he owns the place. That's not how this works." David finally spoke, his voice steady but firm, cutting through the mounting tension like a blade. "That is exactly how it works when the transaction has been in process for 6 months and the final signatures were added today. You made assumptions based on my appearance, my clothing, and whatever narrow ideas you hold about who belongs in a place like this. You treated me like a nuisance instead of a customer, and certainly not like a prospective owner." Laura's hands trembled slightly as she held the folder, flipping through the pages as if hoping to find some error that might reverse what was quickly becoming a nightmare. "Even if this is true," she said, her tone desperate now, "there are procedures, protocols. We need time to verify." "The verification is complete," Derek interjected. "The ownership transfer has been filed with the appropriate authorities, and the bank has confirmed the transaction. Mr. Thompson is not only your customer, he is now your employer." Scott took a step back as if the very weight of the revelation had physically struck him. Other employees began to murmur, some in shock, others in quiet embarrassment. A few sales associates who had laughed earlier when David was being dismissed now looked anywhere but in his direction. their faces pale. David turned slightly, addressing the staff and the customers gathered nearby. What happened earlier wasn't just about poor customer service. It was about judgment, about prejudice, and about a culture that allows such behavior to go unchecked. That culture ends today. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. For those of you who treated me with disrespect, who judged me before I even had a chance to speak, you will no longer be employed here, effective immediately. A sharp gasp echoed from the group, followed by a tense silence. But David continued, his gaze shifting toward Kyle. For those who showed restraint, or at least had the decency to question what was happening, there will be opportunities to remain and to help build the kind of business that values all customers, not just those who look or dress a certain way. Kyle's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly nodded, his posture straightening with a newfound sense of purpose. At that moment, it became clear to everyone present that the dealership's hierarchy had been upended. The man they had dismissed as an outsider had revealed himself not only as a legitimate buyer, but as the one holding all the authority moving forward. David's calm demeanor never wavered. He had spent a lifetime navigating spaces where he wasn't welcomed, proving people wrong not through anger or confrontation, but through quiet, undeniable achievement. Today would be no different. This dealership will change, he declared, not just in ownership, but in values, in treatment of customers, and in how we define professionalism and respect. Those who can embrace that change are welcome to stay. Those who cannot should collect their belongings and leave immediately. David Thompson's voice rang out across the silent showroom, calm yet firm, leaving no room for argument or misunderstanding. Standing near the same Lincoln Navigator he had admired earlier, now symbolically positioned between who he was and who they had assumed him to be, he maintained his modest attire, the gray hoodie and work boots a deliberate reminder that success had never required him to abandon his roots or disguise his identity. Laura Whitman, still clutching the ownership transfer papers, took an involuntary step back, her previously confident demeanor crumbling as the full weight of David's authority became undeniable. Scott Mallory paled, his mouth opening as if to object, though no words came. The other sales associates, who had spent the earlier part of the day either dismissing or mocking David, stood frozen in place. The following individuals, David continued, Laura Whitman, Scott Mallory, and Richard Evans, are relieved of their duties, effective immediately. Your behavior today has demonstrated not just poor judgment, but a fundamental disregard for the values of respect, fairness, and professionalism. That kind of conduct has no place here and will not be tolerated moving forward. The sound of his attorney's pen clicking as he prepared termination documents punctuated the heavy silence that followed. Laura's face turned a deep shade of red, anger and humiliation battling across her features as she struggled to process the rapid collapse of the authority she had once wielded so carelessly. "You can't just fire us on the spot," she finally blurted, voice shaking. "There are procedures, contracts. You need to consult with HR. I am the procedure now," David replied, his voice even, devoid of malice but carrying the weight of absolute authority. The purchase agreement includes full operational control, which extends to personnel decisions. As for contracts, my legal team has already reviewed the employee agreements. Termination for cause, specifically for conduct damaging to the dealership's reputation and violating company policies on customer treatment, is entirely within my rights. At the back of the room, Kyle shifted uncomfortably, not because he feared dismissal, but because the reality of the situation had settled heavily on him. Unlike Laura and Scott, he had hesitated earlier. He had wanted to intervene, though he had not spoken up at the time. His conscience had pricked him then. and it gnawed at him now. David turned his gaze toward him. "Kyle Jenkins! Step forward." Kyle obeyed, his steps hesitant, his heart pounding. "I observed you during the earlier incident," David said, addressing him and the crowd alike. "While you did not speak out directly, you also did not participate in the mockery or judgment that others so willingly displayed. I noticed your hesitation, your discomfort. That matters." Kyle swallowed hard, not daring to speak. "You will stay," David announced. "You will also assist my new management team in identifying other staff members whose behavior aligns with the standards we will enforce moving forward. Employees who have shown fairness, restraint, and a willingness to treat all customers with dignity will be retained and given opportunities to advance. Those who have not will be dismissed." The room remained tense, but among the younger staff, a flicker of relief passed from person to person. Some had remained silent out of fear, others out of uncertainty. But not all had behaved as poorly as the few now facing termination. Laura's voice, sharp and desperate, broke the brief silence. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll lose valuable employees. This dealership has a reputation built on relationships we've developed for years." David's expression remained impassive. Relationships based on discrimination and arrogance are not relationships worth preserving. I would rather rebuild this business from the ground up with people who understand respect than profit from the biases you have normalized. Before Laura could reply, the doors at the front of the dealership opened again. 3 individuals entered, each wearing the polished attire of corporate executives. They were representatives from the auto manufacturer's regional office, whose responsibility included oversight of dealership compliance and performance. "We were contacted by Mr. Thompson's legal team this morning," the lead representative announced, addressing the staff and customers gathered around. "We've reviewed the evidence provided regarding today's incident, including surveillance footage and witness statements." Laura's face drained of what little color remained. "The manufacturer does not tolerate discrimination in any form," the representative continued. "We fully support Mr. Thompson's decisions and will assist in ensuring that the dealership's new leadership meets the highest standards of customer service and professional conduct." The finality of the statement silenced any further protests from the soon-to-be dismissed employees. David nodded in gratitude toward the representatives before turning his attention back to the room. For too long, people like me, people judged by their appearance rather than their character, have been told, in words and in actions, that they don't belong in places like this. That ends today. His words, though spoken quietly, carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of experiences. Every dismissal, every sideways glance, every door closed before he could even knock. To the customers present, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the showroom. "I apologize for the disruption, but I assure you that this moment marks not the beginning of chaos, but the beginning of change. This dealership will become a place where all customers are treated with dignity, where hard-working individuals can expect fair treatment regardless of the clothes they wear or the assumptions others might make about them." One older gentleman near the back, who had witnessed the entire confrontation earlier, nodded approvingly. His wife reached out, squeezing his arm in silent agreement. "For those employees willing to embrace that change," David concluded, "there will be training, opportunities for growth, and a chance to be part of a business that sets a new standard in this industry. For those unwilling, I wish you well elsewhere." As the terminated employees gathered their personal belongings under the watchful eyes of legal counsel and security staff, a quiet but undeniable shift took place. The dealership, once a symbol of exclusion and arrogance, was becoming something new. David remained standing near the navigator, not as a customer denied service, but as the owner who had chosen not to respond to prejudice with anger. but with decisive, measured action. His clothing had not changed, nor had his principles. The only thing that had changed was the understanding, now shared by everyone present, that assumptions could be dangerous, and underestimating a man based on his appearance could have consequences far greater than embarrassment. Today, it had cost some their jobs. Tomorrow, it would build a business that valued respect over pretense, and David Thompson would lead it forward, just as he had led himself forward from humble beginnings to undeniable success. The following morning, David Thompson arrived at the dealership not in a chauffeured car or a luxury sedan, but once again in his dependable black Ford F-150. He wore the same Carhartt jacket and the same sturdy boots that had carried him through the most challenging days of his career. There was no need for a change in appearance now that the ownership transfer was complete and the former management had been dismissed. His authority was not tied to clothing or symbols of wealth. It was rooted in integrity, resilience, and the respect he had earned through years of unwavering dedication. As he stepped into the dealership, the atmosphere had changed. The tension from the day before had given way to a cautious optimism. Many of the employees who remained were gathered near the reception desk, waiting to hear what would happen next. Kyle stood among them, his posture straighter than the day before, a quiet confidence replacing the uncertainty he had previously worn. David walked to the center of the showroom, his boots echoing softly against the tile floor, and turned to face the assembled staff. "I know many of you are wondering what the future holds," he began, his voice calm but firm. "You've witnessed a great deal of change in the past 24 hours. And change can be unsettling, but it can also be the beginning of something better." He paused, allowing his words to settle, and continued. "The decision to purchase this dealership wasn't made out of anger or a desire for revenge. It was made because this business and the people who work here deserve a leader who values fairness, respect, and opportunity for all, regardless of appearance, background, or social status." Kyle nodded slowly, and several other employees exchanged glances, relief washing over their faces. "I've spent my entire career building businesses that thrive, not just because they turn a profit, but because they treat their employees and customers with dignity." David continued, "Those of you who are willing to embrace this vision will have a place here. You'll receive the training and support you need to grow your careers and to create a workplace culture that reflects our shared values." He gestured toward the glass-walled office that had once belonged to Laura Whitman. "That office will no longer be a symbol of exclusion or intimidation. It will be a space where employees and customers alike can come with ideas, concerns, or simply to be heard. Leadership is not about isolation. It's about connection." A few heads nodded, and the mood in the room began to shift. "I also want to address what happened yesterday," David said, "not to dwell on the mistakes made, but to ensure we all learn from them." He paused once more before speaking the hard truth. Too often, people are judged by their appearance, their clothing, their accent, the car they drive. Those judgments can lead to missed opportunities, damaged relationships, and in some cases, as you all saw, the loss of employment. I will not tolerate that kind of behavior here. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect, whether they arrive in a luxury SUV or an old pickup truck. The employees stood quietly, absorbing his words. Some looked remorseful, others thoughtful, but none appeared resistant. "I didn't come from wealth," David continued. "I wasn't handed a business or a fortune. I earned it, step by step, often while wearing boots just like these." He gestured toward his worn footwear. "And I'll continue to wear them because they remind me of where I started and the values that brought me here." He turned to Kyle. "Your instincts yesterday, to question what was happening, Even if you didn't act immediately, showed integrity, you'll have an important role in shaping the new culture here." Kyle swallowed hard and nodded, clearly moved by the recognition. David then addressed the rest of the staff. "For those who have stayed, I want you to know this. Loyalty and fairness will be recognized. Promotions will be based on merit and professionalism, not on favoritism or assumptions. We will set a new standard, not just for this dealership, but for the entire community." The employees began to relax, a few offering small, hopeful smiles. "As for our customers," David added, "we'll be reaching out to those who were mistreated or dismissed in the past, inviting them back, not just with apologies, but with assurances that things have changed. We will earn back the trust that was lost." He concluded, "Success is not just about what you sell, it's about how you treat people, and that principle will guide us every day from now on." The room filled with quiet applause, not out of obligation, but from genuine respect and a sense of shared purpose. David nodded once, then smiled, a rare but sincere expression. "Let's get to work." And with that, a new chapter for the dealership and for everyone inside it officially began. 1 month after assuming ownership of the dealership, David Thompson arrived once again in his Ford F-150, wearing his familiar Carhartt jacket and the same rugged boots, a silent testament to the values he had carried throughout his life. The dealership had undergone not only a physical transformation, with brighter spaces, clearer signage emphasizing respect and inclusivity, and a newly designed customer lounge, but also a deeper, more meaningful shift in culture that could not be measured by paint or furnishings alone. From the moment customers now walked through the doors, they were greeted with a renewed sense of welcome. Staff members, many of whom had been retained or newly hired under David's leadership, had undergone comprehensive training focused not just on sales, but on empathy, professionalism, and equitable treatment. No longer were customers judged by their attire or by the vehicles they drove into the lot. Every individual, whether purchasing a top-of-the-line luxury vehicle or simply seeking information, was treated with the dignity they deserved. News of the dealership's transformation had spread quickly. Not just throughout the local community, but across the region. Local newspapers and radio stations had covered the story, emphasizing how David's quiet but decisive leadership had turned a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for growth and reflection. Business leaders from other industries reached out, asking for advice on how to cultivate similar changes within their own organizations. Most significantly, customers who had previously felt unwelcome or dismissed returned. Some came out of curiosity, others out of cautious hope that things had truly changed. David made it a point to be present as often as possible, not tucked away in an office but visible on the showroom floor, speaking with customers, listening to their experiences, and ensuring that promises were not just made, but kept. Among the first to return was a young Hispanic couple who had once been turned away by the previous staff when seeking a family vehicle. They were now welcomed by Kyle Jenkins, who had since been promoted to sales manager. Kyle, guided by the mentorship David provided, had embraced his new role not just as a salesperson but as a leader, helping to build the inclusive environment David envisioned. "Mr. Thompson," Kyle had said during their weekly staff meeting, "it's not just about the vehicles anymore. People come here because they trust they'll be treated right." David nodded, his gaze steady. That's exactly the point. Beyond the dealership, David's actions inspired broader conversations in the business community. A regional automotive association invited him to speak at their annual conference, where he shared not only his experiences, but also the lessons learned about leadership, accountability, and the importance of judging character over appearance. His speech, delivered in the same understated manner that had become his signature, resonated deeply with attendees. Success, he told them, is not defined by how much you sell or what you wear. It's defined by how you treat others when you think no one is watching. In the months that followed, other dealerships and businesses began revisiting their customer service policies, instituting diversity and inclusion training, and committing to creating spaces where all individuals felt valued. What had begun as a single act of bias had, through David's response, sparked meaningful change far beyond the showroom floor. David never sought recognition or praise. He continued to dress as he always had, driving the same truck and living by the same principles that had guided him from his humble beginnings. But he could not ignore the quiet nods of appreciation from customers, the thank you notes from families who felt seen and respected, and the growing sense that the dealership he now led was more than just a place to buy cars. It was a symbol of what could happen when prejudice was confronted with purpose and perseverance. For David Thompson, that was the true measure of success, and he wore it as humbly and proudly as he did his Carhartt jacket and boots. Every single day, if this story resonated with you, please like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe to join us for more stories that inspire change, celebrate resilience, and remind us all of the power of respect and fairness.